So what's up, guys? In my last video I talked about whether or not Necromancy would be a useful school of magic if it existed in real life. If you haven't seen that video, I highly suggest checking it out. I'll put a link to it in one of these corners. Again, I highly suggest checking it out. It was kind of a neat video, but also it's going to explain a little bit more in depth some of the concepts I talk about in this video. However, that's not to say there aren't some useful or even just plain cool aspects of Necromancy, or at least there would be if it existed in real life. In my last video, I mentioned that the exact capabilities or powers of the Necromancer change from one fictional universe to the other. So in that last video, I also talked about the three most common portrayals of Necromancy. However, in this video, I'm just going to cover two. The first portrayal of Necromancy that I want to look at in this video is one in which the Necromancer casts a spell on a corpse, and that corpse reanimates as a mindless creature under full control of the Necromancer for an unlimited amount of time. Now, the first advantage of this kind of raised creature is in the sense as a whole army. You wouldn't have to worry about feeding them, you wouldn't have to worry about them being hungry, you wouldn't have to worry about them being tired, you wouldn't have to worry about paying them, you wouldn't have to worry about them being afraid. So it makes upkeep extremely easy with this kind of army. And since they're rotting bags of meat for the most part, you really don't have to worry about uniforms or clothing either. But as I mentioned in my last video, the issue with this portrayal of Necromancy is that getting an army of a large enough size to be a serious threat to anybody would be the difficult part. Now, the second advantage to this method of Necromancy is as used as a scout. Now, this would become extremely handy because, as I said in this portrayal, the Necromancer has full control over the raised entities. But because of that, I'm going to assume he can take direct control and control the individual movements of each of his zombie-like creatures. And in that sense, he could take control of a reanimated corpse and head out towards the enemy camp. He could scout and look at what the enemy is doing without any real risk to himself. He could look out and see what the creature sees through the creature's magically reanimated eyes. And if the creature gets caught and captured, so what? What are they going to do to it? Torture it for information? It's already dead. Now, the Necromancer could also use the same idea as with the scout to fight. Now, I mentioned in my last video that the issue with this form of Necromancy is that the individual raised entities wouldn't be very good fighters. They're mindless, they might have skill with a weapon and be able to use it, but they don't have the memories, the thoughts, or the feelings of the person before they died, so they're not going to carry any of that training or experience with them. I think it would be pushing it a bit within the lore of whatever fictional universe this story is taking place in to say, hey, they don't bring any of their memories, emotions, or feelings, but they bring their experience combat training. So I don't think that would work very well within the universe as far as the story is concerned. But if the Necromancer took direct control of one of these creatures, he could sort of, a shadow fighting sort of manner, lead his army from the front without actually having to put himself at risk by putting himself on the front line. If the creature he is possessing happens to be killed, he would just possess another one to lead it from the front. Now, the one issue with this is I'm saying that this creature that the Necromancer is possessing directly would be a more skilled fighter, and that could be assuming that the Necromancer was a skilled fighter himself. By directly possessing a corpse, the corpse would only be as good of a fighter as the Necromancer, since he is simply mimicking the Necromancer's movements. And finally, arguably the largest advantage of this type of Necromancy is that after a battle, your enemy's dead, bolster your own forces. You can replenish your own army by resurrecting the dead of your enemy. Now, in this video, I'm going to assume that you can't resurrect a creature or a corpse more than once. If you could, however, that would be, you could actually grow your army. But I'm going to assume that, for whatever reason, you only can reanimate a body once. But anyway, so you can replenish your own losses and potentially grow it depending on how many corpses there are out there to reanimate. Now, the second portrayal of necromancy that I want to talk about is one in which the necromancer casts a spell on a corpse. The corpse is reanimated, but when he is reanimated, he carries all his memories, thoughts, experience, emotions, feelings, all of that back with him. And so essentially he's a human. He's just in a once dead, potentially decomposing body, kept alive through magic. The first advantage in this portrayal of necromancy is that since the creatures aren't mindless, they could be creative. They could adapt to situations arise within battle, and they could change their own tactics to overcome them. Maybe they could set an ambush or somewhat sort of trap, or they could retreat. They wouldn't need the necromancer's direct input to make decisions and to respond to battle. This also means you can have a better thought out and more organized rank structure, which can lead to disarray if that rank structure is broken or the people at the higher level are killed. However, I think the advantages of having an organized rank structure far outweigh the disadvantages. Another advantage with this portrayal of necromancy is that your army won't get hungry, can't feel pain, and they can feel fear.
Feeling fear is a good thing?
Yes, it can be. See, fear can be an impairment, but it can definitely be a strong motivator as well. They have no reason to fear pain, so they don't have any reason to fear injury. They simply fear death or dying again. And as I said, in this scenario, I'm assuming they can only be resurrected once. So they're not going to want to die again. They've already died, and they know what it's like. So they're going to fight like hell to keep this second life they've been given. And that means if they're cornered, they're going to get aggressive, they're going to be desperate, and they're going to be lethal. And the fact that they can't feel pain means I think they're going to be able to come out of these situations on top more often than not. I mean, even if they're outmatched, if they're fighting several opponents, you know, if they slice somebody's leg, that's an advantage that this raised creature might have, because that human he just hurt is going to be hurt. Whereas if he were to take the same injury, it would have no effect on him unless it took the leg off or had some of their actual physical impairment. And the final advantage I want to talk about is the insensitivity that these creatures would inevitably develop. The fact that they are a skeleton or some sort of partially rotted meat suit, and they're fighting next to people who look pretty much the same, they're going to become quite desensitized to the horrors of war. And because of that, their morality is going to stand in the way less. They're not going to feel as bad about doing something horrific or something obscene or what most people consider gross or grotesque or some other synonym of those words. I don't know how many I need to say. But because of that, I think they'd be extremely aggressive and lethal just because they don't have that mental barrier in their way that humans usually do. So those are what I believe to be some of the advantages of necromancy if it existed in real life. Overall, I still don't necessarily think that it would be the ideal choice of magic. If you had other tools of magic to choose from, probably choose one of those. Don't know if I'm going to do a video on those, haven't really decided. I do have another necromancy video I do want to do at some point here next couple of weeks, depends on how busy I get. But for now, thank you for watching. And if you'd like to check out my book, After the Last Battle, you can find a link in the description. Purchasing that book greatly supports me and the channel. And you can also find the trailer to that book. I'm going to be playing part of it right here behind me. Thanks for watching.
The Archangel Michael was assassinated by his lover, Elimini. His death led to war between the kingdom of heaven and the hordes of hell. It was a brutal war. They always were. But this war was different. Heaven lost this war. With no angels to stand in their way, the demons conquered what remained of the tattered earth. 10 years after the war ended, the cause of Michael's death, a boy, learns of his true potential Read what happens next in After the Last Battle by Matthew Moss.